In this video, I'm going to be taking down or breaking down the undisclosed formula that the top 1% of podcasters are currently using on social media to grow their podcast show. So you're going to learn the one thing that you need to start doing on social media right now to grow your podcast, how to take control back from the algorithm and actually be seen by your ideal listeners, and the 3 steps to visibility growth hacking that high ticket coaches and consultants like you can start using for your podcast today. Stick around to find out exactly what the top podcasters are actually doing on social media to grow their audience. If you are an expert looking for the best advice on how to grow your podcast audience, subscribe to my channel and hit the bell to be notified whenever I post a new video. My name is Deidre Shen, the CEO and co-founder of Capsho. Now, I have been working with experts who cumulatively have banked over $1.6 million in sales through podcasting. I myself did over $200,000 in my first year podcasting because I stumbled upon this little known secret. So let's get into exactly how the top 1% of podcasters are using social media to grow their show.
How do we take it into our own hands to get in front of our ideal clients on social media? What are the top 1% of podcasters actually doing that no one tells you about? None of the social media gurus really talk about, right? They talk about just creating reels, maybe. They talk about looking at trending audio on TikTok. I don't know, they talk about all these things, but what is actually the key to having a sustainable strategy on social media to get in front of your ideal clients? I am joined by my co-founder, Bonarai. She is going to be jumping into this discussion with me and sharing some examples as well of how our team do it, because I'm going to tell you right now, I don't enjoy social media, so the less time
Does anyone anymore? It's just exactly. The fun has been sucked out of it.
Exactly. So the less time I can spend on there, the better. But this is why, for all of us smart podcasters, smart high ticket coaches and consultants who podcast, I will teach you the strategy. This is what we're talking about. But, really what you should be thinking about is how can you quickly almost get it off your plate, right? That's what I did and do, and it's been incredibly successful for me. All right, so let's jump into visibility growth hacking. So visibility growth hacking is really just about what it says on the tin, right? How do you hack growth in your visibility?
Yes.
On social media? And the way that we've done this, so we've got kind of 3 steps that Bono will take you through, but it really is about ultimately knowing who your ideal client is and then going where they are. Now, it sounds stupidly simple, right? Like, I'm sure that you have probably heard some other people say this.
Yes.
But we're going to share with you the specifics around how we actually do it on social media.
Yes.
So the first step, Bonai, and I want you to go into an example of this, but it is actually knowing who your ideal client is.
We had to really, really hone in on not just coaches, or not just business owners firstly, not just coaches, but people who focus on high ticket, and not just people who are podcasting as a way of getting credibility, because that's a lot of people, there's a lot of podcasts out there, but then specifically honing in on people who are already looking to do it with a very express purpose to say, yep, this is almost my preferred way of communicating. I'm not a writer, I'm not a blogger, I like to talk. This is how my preferred way of influencing, and podcasting is something that I'm already, pretty passionate about doing as a way to then convert. So they're already thinking in terms of a funnel. So that's what we had to be really clear about. Really being specific by way of, an example would be, for example, some of the content that we're creating for your account, Deidre, like your organic account. When before with our previous podcasts and things like that, it would just be about the entrepreneur, the struggle that every CEO feels to manage their time. Now, I'm not saying that's not a relevant piece of content, because yes, every CEO does struggle with the balance of like, how do they, allocate their time across family, all that kind of stuff, right? But when we start to niche down and not having enough energy in the day, right? So that could be like a funny TikTok or a reel. So that premise is good, but what makes it great is how can you speak specifically to, for example, a somewhat, ambivert CEO, right? Who's kind of they've got the ability to generate the energy that they know that their listeners need. And then actually be able to say, talk about the struggle of having, 6 different podcast episodes that they need to either record, whether they're being interviewed or interviewing someone else, maintaining the energy and hopefully not collapsing in a heap by the end of the day.
Which I do all the time.
Exactly. So there you can see where it's like so much more niche down because you're speaking to a very specific problem that someone who's already got a podcast up and running, they're already used to guesting and interviewing other people. They're now struggling with the more specific pain point of like, how do you keep that energy going during the day versus someone who is getting into podcasting in general, you know? So that's a very, basic example, if you will, of like the level of discipline you need to have around, okay, how do I speak specifically? Then you're actually able to create a very entertaining, engaging, and educational piece of content versus just like a very broad brush, CEO pain point solver sort of thing. So I think that's the level we need to think at.
Yeah, and actually we might need to know where they're hanging out as well, right? Like, because once you know who they are, like again, when we were talking to all CEOs or all entrepreneurs, like they could be anywhere, right?
And they are.
They are literally everywhere.
Everywhere, yes.
Exactly. But when we can start to hone in on, okay, well, this is the specific entrepreneur or specific CEO that we are talking to, now we can be very much more targeted into knowing who they're hanging out with, where it is that they're hanging out, and go and be there.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely, yeah. And this one's a little bit of a scavenger hunt, if you will. So the reason we want to be really specific, and if I just kind of continue pulling the same thread that we had in the previous point about knowing who they are, so let's almost go, who is almost similar to yourself, a CEO who's leading, multiple businesses potentially, and or a really, kind of the main one that's got their attention. There's a lot of energy going out. So if you think about that person, but they're they're podcasting, you're like, okay, where might this person be? And as you say, when you think about it demographically, it doesn't really help. But really, if you get behind sort of the psychographic elements of their profile, you're like, okay, so for example, platform wise, they should be on Instagram. They are on Instagram, probably begrudgingly so, like you said. But they, again, our target person is someone who knows that they need to be on there. Unfortunately, they don't love it, but they are on there, so they're already there. And then it's kind of thinking about, so an example, this is where I call it a scavenger hunt because there's no neat answer. Unfortunately, we can't give you a list of hashtags to say, these hashtags you can find your ideal person here again. But it's really about what are the online communities, like what do they resonate with? So an example of something like this, which we're testing, could be someone like yourself, maybe, or our target customer here, maybe someone who follows an author like Susan Cain, right, who really talks about, she writes and presents a lot about the topic of, the power of introverts in a world that can't stop talking. And so that would really, that's just one hypothesis though. So then it's kind of like going, okay, so then looking at like the type of people that are following her, the types of hashtags that, her kind of content is getting, and could this be somewhere that our person is? And like with everything, it's testing, but really it's about thinking more from that perspective rather than like here on Instagram on I don't know, Boss Babes is, that's where all the entrepreneurs are. Exactly, that's where all the entrepreneurs, and unfortunately they are, and there's absolutely no way you can get cut through from that very basic perspective. So you do have to think quite critically. So that's one example of like, okay, what might be a thought leader that they follow? That's where they hang out really, because that's who's getting their mind share. Someone like, for example, at the same time, you also follow Russell Brunson, right? Not just on social media, but his teaching. So it's like, okay, could there be not all of Russell Brunson's people though? Is there a subset of, our people that follow certain parts of his content? Maybe they listen to his podcast, right? Maybe it's kind of like, maybe they're not like the ClickFunnels people, but so it's really a little bit of, trial and error, but it's really thinking deeply about who might these people be listening to? And we want to be there as well, either contributing to the conversation and consuming it with them, and hopefully influencing them as well through that lens.
Exactly. And because that was kind of going to be the last point, which is, obviously we want to know who they are. We want to know, therefore, where it is that they hang out and who they're hanging out with. because then we want to be able to participate in those conversations with them.
Yes.
And this is really the most important part, because that I know that I have missed time and time again. And by the way, this is not a natural part for me. So I can say it, and this is one of those examples of like, do as I say, not as I do a lot of times, because I still struggle with this. Like, this is not an easy thing, but
This is hard.
you need to participate in those conversations with them, and not just use social media as a promotion platform, which again, this was the trap that I fell into, right? I'm like, oh yeah, I'll just promote. I'll just give out my valuable content, because surely all these people will somehow stumble across it and decide that they like what they're seeing from me and then convert. And that's just, you guys, that just does not work. Okay.
Yes.
Again, take it from us. That does not work. Let's be smart about this. Let's be smart about how we actually leverage social media. And being smart about it is obviously putting out good content. And we'll talk about that in our next episode, about how to actually do that. That's talk specifically to your ideal client. But then we actually go to where it is that they are, and we actually hang out with them. We actually participate in conversations with them. We're not just there to promote.
Yes.
And so what could that look like?
Yeah, I think I do want to pull on that point that you made about, sort of a trap that you fall into, and I think a lot of us do, where you say, promoting and especially sharing the value from your content feels like a give, and it is, but I think I want us to reframe it into that's actually like a taking, because you're asking them, like you say, you're just assuming that people will take that and be like, oh, this is amazing, let me take all of the steps with you.
Yes.
So we want to think about this process, this last part of the process, to be like, how can we be more truly giving, which is meeting them where they are and engaging them with verbiage, with things that actually resonate with them. And this is an extra, step, like when you say, like, it's not natural for us to do. And you said, I think for you to do, it may not be natural in that particular context, but when you think about offline, you do it all the time. When you're genuinely interested in someone, for business with our friends, when we're sitting down to have a coffee with them, you're not kind of just like cursorily trying to speak to everyone in the room, right? You're with that person, and that's the person you're having a coffee with, and you genuinely want to know how the day is going, or whatever you're talking about.
You mean I don't just run around the room putting up a smiley face emoji?
Exactly.
Everyone like, smile. Okay, on to the next person.
Let me switch up my emoji. I'm going to choose a different emoji.
Let me give you the party popping emoji this time.
And that person's like, this is not the right, like, this is the what? And you're like, oops, wrong emoji, aside, delete, and then here's the sad face emoji for you. I'll be back, crying face emoji. And that's the analogy that I wanted, to your point. But we get to that stage when we're kind of going for breadth and just trying to just spray and pray, right? But we're like, no, we're very intentional about who we're talking to. We're going to invest the time. We know it takes 7 hours, all that kind of stuff, and just being really intentional and quality. That's when you can actually have a proper conversation. Now, does that mean it has to be really drawn out and long? Absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. But it is about going, okay, what is the, what can be genuine and honest? So you already know where they're hanging out, because you know who your person is. Again, you have a hypothesis where they're hanging out. It may not be your exact people straight away, but they're participating in the conversation is really about looking at what conversation's already happening. Reading the room, even if it's the digital room. And an example for one of our clients is that obviously she's not just an entrepreneur, but a big part of her identity is being a really good mom. So some of her content she's going to get resonating with her ideal customer. It resonates with the fact that, how does she be such a present mom with running so many businesses, such large businesses? And she's really very intentional about the way that she communicates with them about, her kids, right? And then very specifically so. And you kind of think, well, what does that have to do with lead gen? But, again, people buy from people. So it's like they're already listening to your podcast, in this case, her podcast, and her business tips. But now this particular part of her visibility growth hacking is being seen as this human who is so much more than that and can actually teach you to have a very successful business while also having a very quality home life. And that's like what she does really well. But it's through this process that new people who are new to her world, who may have just heard her talk very, professionally and stuff about her business, can see that side to her, because she's very intentional about that, those being her content pillars and her way of communicating as well. So I think it's really kind of, that's like one element where they, you're engaging on that. And then when you're sort of going out and, another part of it is also obviously, like we talked about, the thought leaders that they're following. Right. And it's not about being disingenuous and saying, I don't know who this person is, let me just like blast them about how great I think, and hopefully my target customer sees it. But you genuinely do have to find that overlap, that Venn diagram. So if we decide to go and comment on Russell's stuff that, you know, a lot of our ideal clients are seeing, we need to find an angle that really resonates, you know. And because in your case, you are a really big fan of Russell, and you've met him and you've followed his teachings and you've implemented them in such an incredible new way, right? So you want to be engaging with his content from that angle. So that takes a little bit of extra effort, you know, and there's a lot of detail. Maybe in the show notes we can put in, you know, kind of like what the latest podcast that you've done is, like how you've leveraged Russell's strategy. But really, so that would be really, really compelling for our target clients of high ticket coaches going, hang on a minute, I've not seen that example of Russell's teachings.
Yes.
Let me check this person out. Let me just see what her profile's about.
Yeah.
They may not follow straight away.
Yeah.
They may not listen to podcasts straight away. But that's sort of
You're
the
already on their
breadcrumbs.
radar.
Exactly. Because again, you're being yourself, you're being unique, but you're finding that you're hanging out where they are.
By the way, this isn't meant to be a strategy that you're going to be spending hours and hours of your time on. Literally, this is 15 to 30 minutes a day.
Yes.
It's all it takes. 15 to 30 minutes a day to be really intentional about who it is that you are going to start to have conversations with. And I don't mean, you could if you wanted to like DM them, if it makes sense, but I would not start there probably. I would actually just start with like trying to form a genuine connection with them.
Yes.
And hey, if it leads into the DMs, awesome.
Yeah.
And then you might be able to link them to a particular podcast episode that you have because it helps them. It's something that they're potentially struggling with, maybe, I don't know. But that is how the key of visibility growth hacking is really, as it says, to be visible, right? To get visible to them, to get on their radar so they come and check you out. They check out your awesome content that we're going to be talking about next week, next episode. And they check out your profile, they check out your link in bio, which was going to have your podcast. They then spend 7 hours with you because you've also content honey trapped them along the way. And then voila, you have a client who is wanting, an ideal client who is wanting to give you their money.
Know in the comments what you learned from this video, and if you want to hear the full story behind how I stumbled upon this little known secret, then listen to episode 3 of the Grow My Podcast show. I'm going to leave the link for that below. This video out if you want to learn about the 4 story-based content honey traps to use to compel your audience to listen to your podcast show, and this one if you want to hear about the 4 value-based content honey traps.